A very good afternoon to you all. I'm Ashutosh Varshne, and Director of the Center for Contemporary South Asia and Professor here at Watson, and Professor of Political Science as well. And this is the opening event of this semester at our center. It's the entire schedule either is outside or will be handed over to you very soon. And we welcome your presence at all our events. And it's a great pleasure to host and introduce Husain Haqqani, Ambassador Husain Haqqani. I've known him for very long. And there are three aspects of his career that are worthy of note. He has been a columnist for a long time. He's been an academic, and he's been a diplomat and a government advisor. So first, let me introduce him as a journalist/columnist. His columns have regularly appeared in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, frequently appeared. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, International Herald Tribune, LA Times, Financial Times, and with me in the Indian Express. He has written a lot for the newspaper for which I am a columnist in India and a contributing editor. And as a diplomat, he has served Pakistan in two very important diplomatic stations, if you will. He was Pakistan's ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2011, and widely credited for managing a very difficult partnership. He'll say quite a bit, I think, about that today. And before that, his ambassadorial posting was in Sri Lanka in 92-93. In addition, his role in government has also extended to advising 4 Pakistani prime ministers. Hussain, that must be a record. Yeah? 4 Pakistani prime ministers: Yusuf Raza Gilani, Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif, and Ghulam Mustafa Jatoi. As a scholar and academic, he has been associated with Boston University as director for the Center for International Relations and professor of the practice there. Also at SAIS in Washington, D.C., and at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. And the books that he has written include one of my favorite books in Pakistan, the 2005 book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, very widely read. The next book was soon after his term as ambassador ended in Washington. The title of that book was Magnificent Delusions, U.S., Pakistan, and an Epic History of Misunderstanding. The next book was India versus Pakistan, Why Can't We Just Be Friends? Good idea. India and Pakistan versus Pakistan, Why Can't We Just Be Friends? Came out in 2016. And today's talk is based heavily on a forthcoming book, should be out in April in the United States, India, and Pakistan, entitled Reimagining Pakistan. That's also the title for this lecture. Currently, Husain is a senior fellow and director for South and Central Asia at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., where he has made a home now for a long time, and will remain there for the foreseeable future. So please welcome one of the most arresting public intellectuals from Pakistan, Husain Haqqani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vashni, for that introduction. Whenever you use the word arrest in relation to a Pakistani public figure, always be careful. Most of us fear arrest whenever we do head back to our country. Talleyrand was once asked that, you've served in many positions, and, what do we call you? Shall we call you Prince Talleyrand? Should we call you Bishop Talleyrand? Should we call you Ambassador Talleyrand? And he said, well, I don't know. So the person who was asking him said, what do they call you in the streets of Paris? And he said, nothing good. And I guess when you were going through, you served 4 prime ministers, was it a record, etc. The point of it is that at the end of it, it's not much good in terms of what people say back home in Pakistan. Those of you who know Pakistan or Pakistanis, and I'm sure there are some in the audience, it's impossible to have a mix of students at any major American campus where there's not at least 1 or 2 who are either of Pakistani origin or are from Pakistan. You will all attest to the fact that Pakistanis are a kind and generous people. Lots of Pakistanis all over the world as unskilled labor in the Middle East, as cab drivers and factory workers in Europe, as doctors, engineers, bankers, other professionals in North America. They have a reputation for hard work and efficiency. But none of that takes away from the fact that Pakistan still continues to be described around the world as dangerous, unstable, a country that's a terrorist incubator, fragile, and the land of the intolerant. And each one of these is actually from a newspaper or a magazine article headline. It is not difficult to understand the frustration of Pakistanis, both at home and in the diaspora, over the negative portrayal of their country. And for the last few years, in particular, a big debate in Pakistan has been how do we improve Pakistan's image, as if all that is wrong is the image. They are hurt by adverse comments about anything to do with Pakistan because partly it reflects poorly on them. I'm a good guy, I work very hard, my family are all nice people. Why should people look at Pakistan, my country, negatively? Why should there be bad terms? I'm not a terrorist. Why do they think Pakistanis are? But the fact remains that scholarly and media discussion of any country focuses on its politics and policies and not on the virtues of its people. So when people abroad talk about the United States, it's not about whether the people in Middle America are nice or not. It's about what America's policies are. And the same would apply and should apply to Pakistan. So to my countrymen, I always say that no objective analysis can ignore disconcerting highlights of Pakistan's 70-year history. And we must remember that unlike most countries that have history spanning over centuries, Pakistan's history is only 70 years old. 77 years as an idea, 70 years as a country. And during this period, what has Pakistan witnessed? Well, 4 full-fledged wars, 1 alleged genocide perpetrated by the Pakistani side, loss of half the country's land area in conflict, East Pakistan, that has since become Bangladesh, secession of the majority population. Usually it's the minority that secedes, saying that we are not being treated well. In Pakistan's case, the majority seceded. The Bangladeshis or the East Pakistanis were the majority of Pakistan at that time in terms of population. Several proxy or civil wars, 4 direct military coups, multiple constitutions, long periods without constitutional rule, frequent religious and sectarian strife, repeated economic failures, numerous political assassinations, unremitting terrorism, continued external dependence, and chronic social underdevelopment. And I think most people would agree that none of those characterizations is factually incorrect. When Pakistan was created, political scientists and historians described Pakistan as an oddity. It was a nation unlike most others. Instead of shared language or even history, Pakistan was founded on the basis of a common religion under institutions created under British colonial rule. This raised questions about the viability of ignoring ethnic and linguistic diversity, the potential for conflict between sects as well as between modernist and obscurantist definitions of Islam, and the cost of maintaining conflict with India in terms of economic development. One of Pakistan's greatest misfortunes was what it got in the partition of India. Pakistan received 17% of the revenue sources of British India. I would like people to note that down so that they can see the numbers. 17% of British India's revenue sources, 19% of British India's population, 32%, almost a third, of British India's army. So you can see where the problem may have started, although my argument in this forthcoming book, which I invite everyone to read, is that maybe the seeds of the problem were actually sown even before the creation of the country. In the early years, still, despite this uneven sort of picture, most journalists and scholars highlighted the hopeful aspirations of Pakistan leaders and scholars. And they did ask the critical questions: how will Pakistan survive with two wings that are separated by 1,000 miles? How will it be able to pull together an economy? How will it survive the dominance of the military, which was inevitable, considering that it had the government had to allocate more resources for it from day one? Most countries raise an army to meet the threat that they face. Pakistan had an army, inherited an army, and so had to raise a threat to match the size of the military that it had already received. So if you see the early books that came out on Pakistan, if you go to the library, if people still go to the library, you will find that there are books written in the late 1940s and early 1950s which try to explain why Pakistan has been created. And they usually explained it in terms of Hindu-Muslim strife, and they described Pakistan's potential as a Western ally, which was in my book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, and also in Magnificent Delusions, I point out that that was actually like a sales pitch that Pakistan made. You know, we've got this army, it's ready to fight. You want to fight the commies, pour in the money, we'll do it for you. And so that was a way of kind of getting the resources to be able to be functional. And it always described Pakistan's salience in strategic terms. And there are many books of that. I could list those, but there were British authors who primarily wrote about Pakistan. They included many former British civil servants. So you have people like Sir Olaf Caro and Ian Stephens, etc. They were all writing books which basically advanced the Pakistani case, so to speak. They explained what they saw as the inevitability of partition, given the withdrawal of Britain's steadying hand and inexorable Hindu-Muslim differences. The martial virtues of West Pakistan's Muslims as likely anti-communist warriors were extolled in an effort to persuade Western readers, particularly Americans, of the value of Pakistan as an ally in the years to come. Scholarship on Pakistan took a decidedly unfavorable turn after the 1965 India-Pakistan War. The United States had armed Pakistan in the hope that Pakistan's military will be useful against the communists. But Pakistan, as soon as it got armed, had the Patton tanks, had the F-6 or something, Sabre jets. It went to war with India. And that was the first time that American scholars started raising the question, are these guys a little too preoccupied with India and with the resolution of the Kashmir dispute? Pakistan's army was found insufficiently effective in that war and attempted to save its reputation primarily through media image building, which worked better in Pakistan than it did outside. So even today, I run into young Pakistanis who kind of say, we've come to an American school for the first time after having completed our early education in Pakistan. We find as if we are in parallel universes. We are taught there, we won the 1965 war. Here we learned we didn't win the 1965 war. There we learned that in 1971 India intervened to divide Pakistan up. Here we learned that Indian intervention was just marginal to the fact that there was a genocide taking place in Bangladesh that had to be forestalled, and therefore Bangladesh came about. So that variation is essentially a result of how a national narrative has been built in Pakistan that is not necessarily in accordance with facts that are generally accepted. So the 71 war exposed another thing, which was Pakistan had since 1947 a military doctrine that the defense of the East lies in the West. That was the one-line phrase that General Ayub Khan, who commanded Pakistan's military from 1951 to 1964 or something, and then as Supreme Commander lasted till 1969, he came up with it, which basically meant Pakistan will have only 10,000 troops in East Pakistan or 15,000 troops, and that's fine if India attacks East Pakistan. But India never attacked. And so basically it was essentially a national narrative, which is why I say that in some ways the Indian threat was partly manufactured to justify the size of the armed forces rather than a genuine threat that came about. Did many Indians think Pakistan should not have been created? Absolutely. A lot of Pakistanis thought that too. Probably still do. But that was not going to mean that India was going to militarily intervene and undo Pakistan until, of course, the circumstances of 1971 came about. The civil war and the genocide in East Pakistan really created a lot of discussion about the idea and prospects of Pakistan, and the titles of books on Pakistan from that era reflect the outsider's skepticism. You just need to go through the list, just look for a book list from the 1970s and early 80s, and you will find a lot of books with titles that are that reveal themselves to sort of people are questioning whether this country is viable or not. Now you can see on the one hand a very skeptical rest of the world, and Pakistanis, including myself, who know nothing else as their nationality except Pakistan because we were born there. What happened, how it came about, etc., is less relevant to us. What matters more is it is our country. So therefore, it creates this tension, especially for a Pakistani or a person of Pakistani origin, as to why the rest of the world doesn't think of us nicely, and we somehow still feel that we have a justification to exist as a nation state. More recently, especially after the 1980s, beginning with the 1990s, the skepticism has given way to apprehension and foreboding. People who've been writing books about Pakistan, for example, have raised questions about Pakistan's political orientation, its inability to maintain democracy, military intervention in politics, endemic corruption, questions about nuclear security, perennial difficulties in relationships with neighbors, including Afghanistan now, and also difficulties with the world's major powers. I mean, America was a major ally of Pakistan for many years, and now you see the kind of criticism, skepticism of Pakistan coming out of the United States. Think about it. President Eisenhower declared Pakistan the most allied ally of the United States. He said that, by the way, in the year of my birth, 1956. Now, what did President Trump say recently about Pakistan? Everybody remembers, because everybody remembers President Trump's tweets, right? So what are the titles of books on Pakistan? If you go shopping for books on Pakistan now, they range from titles like Ellen McGrath's The Destruction of Pakistan's Democracy, Christoph Jaffarlow's Pakistan, Nationalism Without a Nation, Owen Bennett Jones's book, Pakistan, Eye of the Storm, Marianne Weaver's Pakistan, Deep Inside the World's Most Frightening State, Pamela Constable's Playing with Fire, Pakistan at War with Itself, etc., etc., etc. Now, Pakistan has certainly come a long way since it emerged as a new country on the world stage 70 years ago. When Pakistan's first Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan visited the United States in 1950, he encountered several reminders of Americans' ignorance about Pakistan. Vice President Alban Barkley introduced him to the US Senate as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which, as you all know, exact quote, which, as you all know, was a part of India. According to the account of a British diplomat, he was sitting next to Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan and an American businessman, and the map of Pakistan in those days, and try and visualize that map in which what is today Bangladesh and what is today Pakistan were both part of Pakistan, and in between was India. But they had done one of those colorful things in which they hadn't written anything. It was just a picture. And this American businessman asked Liaquat whether the blank space between the two parts of Pakistan as showed on the menu was Africa. So no one is that oblivious of Pakistan anymore. That is one thing Pakistanis can certainly take comfort in. But if anything, Pakistan has become a country of concern to Americans and the rest of the world after having been an ally for several decades. Although Pakistan lost its eastern wing, Bangladesh, it has managed to survive. And in the Pakistani narrative, survival is important. The way Pakistanis discuss Pakistan's own history and the way they are taught it is this was a country that was created in the tooth of immense opposition, and look at us, we've survived. We are still standing. Pakistan civil servants and economists have written. There's a book by edited by Dr. Malia Lodi, who's our ambassador to the United Nations right now, titled Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State. It's a lot of sort of backslapping. You know, we produced X number of, X amount of wheat in 1947. Look, we are producing so much more now. We had only this many students in colleges, but look at what we have now, etc., etc. And they point out, rightly, that Pakistanis are living longer than at the time of the country's birth, and the country's literacy rate and per capita income have also gone up significantly. But Pakistanis, when they are looking for sources of pride, list the nuclear armed military, which is one of the world's largest fighting forces, number 6 in the world in absolute numbers, and number 9th in firepower. And they also take pride in the achievements of many individual Pakistanis who have excelled in global business, world sports, or gone on to win international recognition, including 2 Nobel Prizes. Although, there too, there is a tragedy. One of the Nobel Prizes was won by a member of the Ahmadiyya community, which is considered non-Muslim in Pakistan, and therefore there is a lot of criticism whenever somebody refers to him as the world's first, Pakistan's first Muslim Nobel winner. There's an unnecessary debate about, instead of accepting the pride in him, there's always this debate about he wasn't Muslim, because the sect that he belongs to is deemed non-Muslim under the Pakistani constitution. And that too, by the way, is a unique thing. Pakistan is the only country that has gone to define a particular sect as not being part of a particular religion through a constitutional amendment. What country does that? There are many people in the United States, go down, I just flew in this morning from the South. There are many people in the American South, evangelical Christians, whom if you ask them, do you consider Mormons members of the Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, do you consider them Christians? And they'll say, no, they're not Christians. But you don't have a constitutional amendment that says they can't call themselves Christians. Pakistan has that. So,
but not originally. It was 1970.
1974. Yeah. So there are other things. In the global imagination, Pakistan is the country chosen by terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden as his home for the last several years of his life. Pakistan is identified as a country prone to military coups. It is known for its strict blasphemy laws targeting religious minorities, as well as for imprisonment, murder, and lynching of individuals for religious reasons. International media coverage highlights Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorist groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba, which conducted the Mumbai attacks in 2008. The Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani network that attacked NATO troops and Western civilians in Afghanistan. Now, in the view of Pakistan's privileged classes, Pakistan is just too important in geostrategic terms to be ignored. So according to this belief, if the US turns against Pakistan, we don't give a whatever. It will only become more attractive as a partner to other global powers, China and Russia. If you read Pakistan's newspapers these days, that's the theme there. America is going, declining power, China rising power about to come. Pakistan has already attained its place in the sun, having tested nuclear weapons. We are only one of 7 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons in a declared manner. We are foreordained to be a major power. And how we view ourselves is more important than how others view us. Now, there is always a gulf between how a nation sees itself and how others see it. But the gulf is much bigger in case of Pakistan than in the case of most countries. Pakistanis often do not see much of the criticism of their country as valid. Outsiders describe it, whatever they might choose, incubator of terrorism, crisis state, etc., a state perpetually on the brink of failure. Pakistanis say, none of that is about to happen. This is all an image problem. The more criticism comes about, the more defensive Pakistanis get about it. And the need to sort of say, no, 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 we are much better than what you think we are. And so there's this, what I call parallel universes of description. Inside Pakistan, there's a lot less debate about Pakistan's weaknesses and failings and problems than there is outside of the world. Now, how has Pakistan reached this point? Before that, let me say a few words about why I have the topic today, Reimagining Pakistan, and why I've written a book on it. Several years ago, actually, you might remember, Dr. Varshney, you invited Salman Rushdie and a bunch of us in the context of his book, Midnight's Children, to the University of Michigan. And there, I had an exchange with Mr. Rushdie on stage. Mr. Rushdie had said that if nations are imagined communities, as Benedict Anderson points out, then Pakistan is a poorly imagined nation. To which I had said, that may well be true, but what do you suggest for those who have known no other identity except Pakistani? Those who have been born Pakistanis. And our numbers are increasing. In fact, now, in 2003 it was a little less, but now it is almost 92% of Pakistan's population were born Pakistanis. So for us, the only solution would be that we should reimagine Pakistan. To which Mr. Rushdie's reply was, well, Mr. Haqqani, if somebody is going to try and reimagine Pakistan, it might as well be you. And so since 2003, it's been kind of gelling and working in my head as to, yeah, this country does need imagination. Even when I served as ambassador, I would get into arguments with our military leaders, etc., and others, that the imagination of Pakistan as it is flawed. What is the flaw? Pakistan imagines itself as a quote-unquote ideological state. It had to be created because the Muslims of the subcontinent could not live together with the non-Muslims in the same country. The problem with that argument is that right now neither all the Muslims of the subcontinent live in Pakistan. In fact, a majority is not Pakistani. After the separation of Bangladesh and India together account for 2/3 of the Muslims of the subcontinent. Pakistan accounts for only 1/3. Second, India's Muslim population is rising. It might, according to certain projections, rise or increase more than the Muslim population of Pakistan. What does that do for this theory of Muslims and non-Muslims cannot live under the same flag, under the same country? An easier way out would be to try and say, in 1947, for a number of reasons, a country was created called Pakistan. This is the starting point. And this country should run according to this vision. And that vision has to be articulated. So this book, Reimagining Pakistan, is probably attempting to try and do that. It analyzes the historic issues. For example, in the Pakistani narrative, a lot is said that, when Pakistan was born, civil servants arrived in Karachi and they sat on old boxes because there wasn't accommodation and there wasn't paper to write on, and they used thorns from trees instead of paper clips, etc. All true. But why did that happen? It happened because the Muslim League elite, the Muslim League was the party that led Pakistan to independence. The Muslim League elite had paid no attention to what would happen after independence. They were so busy polarizing Muslim versus non-Muslim, to be able to succeed politically. And we see that polarization process right now going on here. So you can understand how polarization works sometimes, because it's a good way of getting people's votes. But then when it comes time to translate into policy, it's not always easy. And so the truth is, Pakistan had a choice at that time. It could have made the capital in Lahore, which was an older city, had a long history as a provincial capital. Punjab, the province of which it was the capital, was being divided. It would have a lot of accommodation, of government accommodation. But Pakistan's leaders at that time chose Karachi because it was the birthplace of the founder of the nation, an emotional reason. And so they found themselves making a capital in a city which simply did not have the resources or the means. Similarly, other things. Pakistan's dispute over Kashmir. Pakistanis sometimes totally ignore the fact that until the last minute, Pakistan's founder was negotiating with non-Muslim majority princely states, talking to the Maharaja of Jodhpur, accepting the accession of the princely state of Junagadh, which was a Hindu majority state but a Muslim ruler. In case of Jodhpur, it was particularly interesting because the ruler was Hindu, the majority population was Hindu, and yet he was willing to say, well, the princes can accede to anybody, so why don't you accede to Pakistan? And so that kind of takes away the major argument that Pakistanis feel applies to Kashmir, where the princely ruler was non-Muslim, was a Hindu, and the majority of the population was Muslim. So there was no consistency in those arguments. And what I think 70 years later is needed is a attempt to try and get beyond all those arguments, beyond the arguments of creation, and imagining a future in which there is some acceptance of the accidents that led to the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan is now a territorial state. It is secured by a large military and the possession of nuclear weapons. More than 95% of its citizens are Pakistanis by birth and have known no other nationality. Contemporary Pakistan need not seek national identity in the idea of a separate homeland for Muslims of the Indian subcontinent, which was always vehemently debated since it was first mooted. But insecurity remains the hallmark of Pakistan's political and intellectual conversation. Even comment about, say, Pakistan's relatively low ranking among nations for book readership, and you will get attacked. All of you, if you want to find out how that feels, just start following me on Twitter. Every time I say something like, Pakistan, new UNESCO study shows Pakistanis read less books per capita than 179 other countries, the tweets start. You traitor, how dare you, da 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 da. Meaning if you're a Pakistani, all you should say is hallelujah, Pakistan, long live Pakistan, onwards to greater glory. Most Pakistanis cling emotionally to the two-nation theory that led to the partition of British India and the creation of Pakistan, instead of viewing themselves as citizens of a modern territorial state. For them, it is important still to win the argument over Pakistan's conception. Any discussion of poor performance in the economic or social sphere or about differences among Pakistan's ethnic groups is often described as questioning the country's very right to exist, which it is not. The world, by and large, recognizes and respects Pakistan as a significant country, notwithstanding scholarly reservations about the two-nation theory. Even Indians, most of whom see Pakistan's emergence with a sense of historic loss, no longer question Pakistan's existence, even if they dispute the reasoning behind its creation. But that has done little to transform Pakistan's nationalism away from the ideological debates preceding its foundations. For Pakistanis born after 1947, being Pakistani by birth should be a matter of fact, not one that requires rationalization by a state ideology. Still, a self-justifying attitude over the two-nation theory underlines almost all discussions in the country. It is almost as if Pakistanis still need to convince themselves and the world that their decision to create a new country was right. The reason for this defensiveness might lie in the unique circumstances of Pakistan's emergence as a nation and a state. Unlike nation-states that evolved over time, Pakistan was the product of a conscious political demand. Even the name of the new country, where none existed before, was deliberately crafted as an acronym of its component provinces as well as a word with a meaning. And the meaning of that word, of course, is the land of the pure. Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah was a brilliant politician who pulled together diverse groups and rallied them to the cause of protecting undivided India's Muslims by grouping Muslim-majority provinces. Historian Aisha Jalal, not far from here at Tufts University, points out that to garner wide support, Jinnah, quote, could not afford to state precisely what the demand for Pakistan was intended to accomplish. The demand for Pakistan, therefore, had to be specifically ambiguous and imprecise to command general support, something specifically Muslim, though unspecific in every other respect. And therein lies Pakistan's original problem. The ambiguities that characterized the demand for Pakistan could not persist once that demand was fulfilled with the creation of an independent country. Just as invoking religion enabled Jinnah to rally Muslims to the demand for Pakistan, his successors chose to run the country by summoning Islamic sentiment in varying degrees. Many of Pakistan's problems, from falling behind in secular education to the rise of Islamist extremism, can be traced to the country's founding on the basis of a religious nationalism. Some of the difficulties awaiting Pakistan, forging a nation out of disparate ethnic groups connected to each other mainly by religion, costly competition with a much larger neighbor, mobilizing resources for a new country from a geographic region that did not yield much revenue before independence, being caught between competing global powers, had been predicted by critics throughout the 1940s, and they were ignored. And ironically, some of these critics were Muslims, and very prominent Muslims. But there was a tendency at that time among the leadership that was leading Pakistan to independence to be dismissive about anybody who criticized the idea or questioned it. And the same process has actually been internalized and made national policy in Pakistan. Hence, people like me being seen as critics or traitors instead of being seen as people reviewing or analyzing the state of the nation. So, where is Pakistan today? Most of the Pakistani discourse is about how if only Pakistan's founder, Mr. Jinnah, had lived longer, or if only this had happened, if only India had done this, or if America had done that. But nations must take responsibility for what they do, the choices that they make and their leaders make. These are more excuses than explanations for Pakistan's turbulent past and uneasy present. Pakistan is a semi-authoritarian state and a national security state. And those are the two realities that none of us can say are can dispute. The Pakistani national narrative, to sustain itself, has a preponderance of conspiracy theories about external forces and their domestic henchmen harming Pakistan. And that is a constant feature. In fact, my book has a whole chapter on conspiracy theories, and you will find some of them very interesting. From one of the funniest in it is about a theory that came out in Pakistani media a few years ago. Someone reported that a child, a baby, an infant, had been killed by rats. A bunch of rats jumped on it, and sort of, the baby was lying, and so the rats kind of ate the baby, basically. That became a conspiracy theory a few days later, that the CIA has bred special, large, massive, man-eating rats to be able to punish the people of that region bordering Afghanistan for having Islamist sympathies. No one saw the massive, specially bred rats. No one could produce a picture, but the story got circulated for days and days and days. What propels that? I analyze that in my book, and I reach the conclusion that it's partly orchestrated and methodically done. Similarly, that the floods in Pakistan in 2010 were orchestrated by the Americans through some kind of special technology that raises the levels of seas and rivers. India, of course, is constantly conspiring against Pakistan. Now, how India is going in a more Pakistani direction, which I call the Pakistanization of India, that's a separate subject for which I am quite happy to come a couple of semesters from now to give a separate lecture. But on the Pakistani side, these conspiracy theories and half-truths are a real issue. And then there are the perennial debates. You rightly pointed out that the Ahmadi question, when the Ahmadis were declared non-Muslims, was not originally in Pakistan's law. It was inserted in the constitution in 1974. But then we must remember that the constitution that Pakistan has now started out only in 1973. And the debate about it started way back in 1953. Who is a Muslim? And 74 was kind of an attempt to settle that debate by declaring one community as non-Muslim, except that then that raised the question of will there be other sects that can be declared non-Muslim, which is why now there is a movement in Pakistan to declare the Shias as non-Muslim. Considering that there are almost 72 sects and denominations of Islam in Pakistan, it will be a very complicated process if one starts going one by one saying, you know, according to the beliefs of this group, such and such group is non-Muslim. So those debates will remain as long as Pakistan insists on being a Islamic republic. Much of the dysfunction in Pakistan has to do with conflicting views on certain core questions. How Islamic is Pakistan meant to be? What does it mean to be an Islamic state in modern times? What should be the balance of power between a central Pakistani government and the various provinces which represent virtually various nationalities and ethnic groups? Must Pakistanis forever be at war with India to justify its existence as a separate state? If so, how can it avoid dominance by the military and the mullahs and the militants? Now, policy debates in most countries involve acknowledgement of threats and challenges alongside discussion of strengths and opportunities. In Pakistan, however, there seems to be an obsession with the country's image at the expense of ignoring unpleasant realities. What are those unpleasant realities? Let me just go over some of them. Very interesting. I was just researching for this book and I came upon this article. I was looking for Pakistan positive, like what are the people, hashtag Pakistan positive, people keep doing that. So I found those and then looked at the stories behind each one of those Pakistan. One of the stories was that in 2002, Pakistan's stock market was listed as one of the best performing stock markets in the world. So Pakistani newspapers all went saying, wow, bells and whistles, our stock market is performing very well, etc., etc. None of them mentioned that the Karachi Stock Exchange, which is Pakistan's main stock market, its market capitalization then and now in 2016 was very small. In 2016, it stood at 89 billion, which compares unfavorably with even the Bangladesh Stock Exchange, whose market capitalization is 320 billion. So basically, a small market doing very well in terms of its returns. Headline is doing very well in returns, not mentioning that, hey, we are far too small even in our own region compared to that part that left us. And left us at a time when Henry Kissinger described it as the basket case. If anyone remembers, in 1971, Henry Kissinger's reasoning for not supporting the creation of Bangladesh was, if Bangladesh is created, it would be a basket case, because it's not productive enough, it's not economically successful enough. Today, Bangladesh, in fact, just 2 months ago, Bangladesh's per capita income exceeded Pakistan's by a few dollars for the first time. So instead of the binary debate over whether Pakistan is a success story or a failure about to materialize, it is important to assess both the achievements and disappointments of the last 70 years. Pakistan has certainly made some progress since its inception. There's no dispute about it. Life expectancy in 1951 was 40. It's 66 now. There are fewer Pakistanis living in poverty. The literacy rate has quintupled. Is that the correct pronunciation? Quintupled, whatever that means. 5 times, right? Since independence. The literacy rate in 1947 was 11%, rising to 53% 52, 53% recently. But they can't be seen, these figures can't be seen in isolation from what others have done. Just by comparison, Pakistan's literacy rate rose from 11% to 56, but India's rose from 12% in 1947 to 75. How did a 1% difference between India and Pakistan become a more than 20% difference, or almost 20% difference, 70 years later? They must have done something differently and something right. We must have done something differently and something wrong. And if you study it, you find that for 15 years after independence, Pakistan made no allocation for literacy in its national budget. Between 47 and 57, Pakistan's literacy rate actually remained unchanged or even declined, albeit marginally. Even now, 40% of Pakistan's population cannot read or write. 57% of Pakistan's adult population above the age of 15, 31% of men, and 45% of Pakistani women remain illiterate. Pakistan is home to the third largest illiterate population globally, and there are only 15 countries in the world with a lower literacy rate than Pakistan. Think about it. So if there are 193 members of the United Nations, the Pakistani literacy rate is higher than only 15 of them, which means it's less than all the rest of them. There's a huge education crisis. I could go on and on about it, but I won't. All I will point out is that Pakistan also has the highest number of out-of-school age children between the age of 5 and 15 in anywhere in the world. Now, what is the consequence of this? Please just tell me when you want me to stop. I can stop quickly. The low rate of literacy and inadequate investment in education has led to a decline in Pakistan's technological base, which in turn hampers economic modernization. There are 43 countries in the world that are poorer than Pakistan on a per capita GDP basis, but 24 of them send more children to primary school than Pakistan does. Not only that, in terms of global rankings of Pakistan's quality of education also, Pakistan has not done very well. So we have a unique situation in which Pakistan has low spending on education and low spending on public health care, which means that its ranking in what is known as human development is very low. Pakistan is the 6th largest nation in the world by population, has the 6th largest army. Its military is the 11th most powerful in terms of firepower, but it is only 26th by size of GDP on a PPP basis and 42nd on a nominal basis. Is it that difficult to understand what the core argument here is? Pakistan's desire to compete with a country 6 times larger than it by population, 10 times larger than it by GDP size, is doomed to failure for the simple reason that Pakistan is economically and in terms of human capital not being competitive. Pakistan's economy based on its GDP per capita is ranked 171 out of 229 economies. Almost 2/3 of Pakistan's population lives on less than $2 per day. The Global Competitiveness report by the World Economic Forum ranked Pakistan's overall ability to compete in the global economy at 122 out of 138 countries. Pakistan's higher education and training was ranked at 123 in the world, and it had a very poor score. They have a score and then they do rankings, and the score was 2.9 out of 7. Although textiles are the country's major industry, and Pakistan is a major cotton producing nation in the world, Pakistan is not even a leader in value added textile production. Bangladesh, that does not produce cotton, has a higher value of textile exports than Pakistan, which is a major producer of cotton textiles. Why is that? Because Bangladesh does value addition, Pakistan does not.
No, let me say the following, Husain. When you were talking before this lecture, you said you the book will also have an alternative vision about
So
how to
I'm-
move forward. Huh?
So you want me to jump to the vision
Yeah,
rather
so-
than describing the situation? Okay, fine.
No, no. It's for you to decide that. But in the next 10 minutes or so, if you lay out that vision that you think
Absolutely.
Pakistanis should debate,
Absolutely.
and that would be
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll come to that. So, how does Pakistan start reimagining itself? After much consideration, I've reached the conclusion that the key to it would be its view of self. Who are we as a nation? The Pakistani answer to who we are as a nation is essentially we are the Muslim part of South Asia, which was forced to become independent because we could not live alongside or be partners with India. It's a view of itself as a nation of martial races. Which is a theory that goes back to the British era when the British recruited. Why did Pakistan end up with 1/3 of the British Indian Army? Partly because the British recruitment policy was one in which they had or wanted to have 1/3 of the recruitment from what they called the martial races of Punjab and the Muslim martial races. So they had Punjabi Hindus, Punjabi Sikhs, and Punjabi Muslims. They did not consider the Bengalis or the Madrasis as martial races and did not recruit from there. It goes all the way back to Lord Roberts of Kandahar and his martial races of India. And so Pakistan's whole national view, therefore, is shaped by religion and antipathy towards the much larger neighbor, India. And the beginning of any reimagining of Pakistan would have to tackle these two issues. First, an understanding that the individual can be pious, the society can be religious, but the state must be secular. In Pakistan, to say that you are secular is nowadays inviting death because you would immediately be accused of being a potential blasphemer. Whereas at the beginning of Pakistan, and even until 1971, large political parties described themselves as secular. So the Awami League, for example, which ended up being restricted to East Pakistan and ended up leading Bangladesh to independence, declared itself in its party constitution as a party standing for a secular Pakistan. The National Awami Party, which was banned in 1973 or 74 by Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, that described itself as a secular political party. Now, only one major political party describes itself as a secular party in its own constitution, and that is the MQM in Karachi. Every other political party has ended up adopting some variation. So for the Pakistan People's Party, with which I have had a relatively long association, even they describe in their thing as a party that is committed to Islam, democracy, and socialism, instead of sort of saying, religion should not be a matter for legislation and it should be left to the individual. So this debate on secularism has to start all over again. Second, the debate over relations with India. The antipathy towards India is an easy way to generate, and competition with India is an easy way to generate or create a national identity. The other is always easy. But sometimes it takes absurd manifestations in Pakistan. The Pakistani cricket team beats India in the Champions Trophy in England. And what happens? The Pakistan Army chief announces that the Pakistani cricket team has saved national honor, and therefore the cricket team members will be sent for pilgrimage to Makkah at the expense of the Pakistani army, as if it's a matter of national security and national defense that Pakistan should not let India win a cricket match. That attitude essentially feeds a kind of hatred and negativity which saps Pakistan's energies, but also does not allow a positive Pakistani nationalism to emerge. Also ensures that Pakistan's resources continue to be diverted towards endless warfare and competition with India, instead of looking at opportunities. So for example, Pakistanis are putting a lot of store in China's investments in infrastructure in Pakistan, which will connect Pakistan only to China. The fact of the matter is that East-West connectivity is equally important. The traditional and historic trade links between all of the countries of South Asia. And Pakistan needs to have trade and tourism with and from India, which would add significantly to Pakistan's gross domestic product. The third part of reimagining Pakistan is an absolute consensus on democracy. It's absolutely essential. Pakistan has not had that consensus. Pakistan's elite has always had a strong segment that talks about an Islamic form of government that allows people like General Ziaul Haq, or subsequently also even Mr. Nawaz Sharif at one point wanted to enforce Sharia. So the Sharia becomes a substitute for democracy. And the absence of democracy particularly affects the smaller provinces and ethnic groups of Pakistan, because their only hope of having a share of the big Pakistani economic pie is by having democratic representation in their own respective regional or state assemblies. The next important feature of reimagining Pakistan is to reimagine it as a confederation or a federation of ethnicities. That denial of ethnic identity has to end. Pakistan right now has a unique situation in a federal system where one ethnic group, one unit of the federation, Punjab, accounts for more than half the population. And so theoretically, you can actually form the federal government with votes from only one part of the country. And the other groups can be excluded from the federal government. And that single group, the Punjabi, also accounts for 72% of the military when they are 54% of the population. That also makes them powerful in terms of being able to get a major share of resources, enables people from Punjab to settle in other parts of the country, especially Balochistan, where the Baluchis are now slowly becoming a minority. And lastly, Pakistan's reimagining would have to involve an acceptance that no nation can become a great power by standing on the shoulders of another country. Great power status or national power essentially comes from a number of things: your human capital, your economic base, your military strength. It cannot come primarily from offering yourself as an ally to other nations and getting them to pour money into your economy or your military. Since Ashu is getting ready to start the question and answers, I can feel that. I think I should stop here with the reimagining. Those are the 5 major areas of reimagining, and how will it be done will be the next question, I think. And the answer to that question is, it will only be possible if it starts being debated and discussed. If you have a conformist notion of nationalism, if you do not allow dissident voices to voice what alternative visions there can be for the country, if you say that anybody who advocates normal relations with India is an Indian agent, if you say anybody who says let's not depend on the United States is an American agent, if you say anybody who opposes terrorism because it's in the name of religion and says A, there should be no terrorism, and B, the name of religion should not be used for political purposes, then that person is against religion. You basically are creating a recipe for failure of the country from within. I'm not one of those who wants Pakistan to fail. I'm not one of those who's predicting the failure of Pakistan in the very near future. But I do see that the current situation is not necessarily going to bring either success or glory to Pakistan. In the days to come, we will see Pakistan coming under greater criticism and attack from the rest of the world rather than less. And Pakistanis need to wake up to that situation. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, instead of continuing to pour money into Pakistan and letting it build itself as a militarized, militant, infested nation, the rest of the world's policies towards Pakistan have to recognize its own internal dilemmas, problems, and failures. I'll stop here and we can start the questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you, Husain. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Let me start with some comparative reflection. I think you've thought about it perhaps even more than when we discussed it last time when you were in Boston, at the Boston University before you went away to Washington as ambassador. If we look at comparative history of nations and adversarial relations between nations, and we ask, are there any parallels to the India-Pakistani relationship in history? Several examples do emerge, actually. For example, let me give you just two, and I'm sure there are others. Linda Colley, professor of history, British history at Princeton, has a famous book called Britons, where the argument is that Britain, the various constituents of Britain, Scotland, Wales, and England, could not have fused together, could not have come together without a feeling of enmity vis-a-vis Catholic France. Right? Now, there are other arguments in that book, including how the Scots and the English came together partly because of Indian Empire. The argument being that Scotland was never more than 10% of Britain, but Scots were anywhere between 25 to 40% of the British people in India during 1757 and 1947, right? So that's another. But the beginning of that argument is that British national cohesion required, she says that, required in the beginning, this cohesion, coming together of the fractious English and Scots in particular, if not the Welsh. A vigorous adversarial relationship, even enmity with Catholic France. Now, you say that there's another argument about, for example, USA-Canada relationship, which we have discussed, but I think no one takes that.
I'll summarize it in a minute.
Yeah. So, and we can think of other places which have had that. So Pakistan, actually, comparatively speaking, is not the only country which requires, if you will, enmity vis-a-vis another nation in order to generate cohesion. Right? So how would you react to that? And you know, this is just one example, the best example we know, a British-French relationship. We can think of others.
No.
How would you react to this parallel?
First of all, I think that it helped the Scots, the Welsh, and the English that they were all on one relatively small island.
Right.
And in case of Pakistan, and none of them was part of somebody else or did not have an overlapping ethnicity or culture with somebody else.
With continental Europe, okay.
With continental Europe. In case of Pakistan, the Pashtuns have affinity with Afghanistan. The Baluch have an overlap with Iranian Baluchistan and Afghan Baluchistan. The Sindhis have had an independent kingdom at one point and have had much less affinity with Punjab than they had eastward in the beginning. And their language, etc., is very unique. And the one that is the strongest, so for example, in England, in case of Britain, England was the heartland.
Yeah.
Pakistan does not have a heartland that way. In the end, Pakistan is a far newer creation. It's not an island. Punjab is the only part that, because of its military history, ends up having the hostility towards India, which Sindhis do not have. And survey after survey has indicated that most Baluch, most Sindhis, and most Pashtuns do not have the same views about India or about the rest of the world that the Punjabis do. And then within Punjab also there's an ethnic issue between the Saraiki speakers and the Punjabi speakers. So the British cohesion model simply is not easily applicable. But there are lessons to be learned, and I'm sure that that's what our elite is hoping. My view is that we live in a different time, and at that time it may have been possible, and being an island helped, whereas we are not an island. Second, we could get away with it if we did not have this constant prodding of India, meaning that the British, while they may have generated constant antipathy towards the French, and they did not constantly have they were not in a permanent state of battle with them. Pakistan, on the other hand, has, in 70 years, had 4 wars. And the terrorism war is continuing, and two can play it, unfortunately, as Pakistan has rightly pointed out, that India may be trying to do something similar in Pakistan, and so all of that could harm Pakistan more before the cohesion that you are talking about is achieved. So in my example, I say we could end up in a slightly different situation. We could end up like Yugoslavia, where the cohesion has not yet been achieved, but the forces that have been unleashed as a result of trying to achieve that cohesion then end up playing out in terms of internal conflict, and that's not a good thing. I also cite the example. So the America-Canada example is that when Mr. Jinnah was asked after the creation of Pakistan, how did he foresee relations between India and Pakistan, he said, I'd like us to live like America and Canada, which basically means a very different relationship than we have. The Canadians do not resent America being militarily more powerful or being bigger. I don't think that there will be riots in Canada if the Toronto Blue Jays lose to the Boston Red Sox. There's no major sort of issue of that nature. The borders are open, and basically, there's criticism, and the Canadians take pride in their more social democratic orientation
And pacifist.
And pacifism, but basically nobody nurtures a grudge. My whole argument is based on the fact that in Pakistan it's not that the grudge is nurtured by Pakistan's military intelligence complex, and with the help of a very small body of political actors. And there I say, then there is also a huge difference of size. So the difference of size between Great Britain and France was not that significant in terms of numbers of population, in terms of military strength, etc. The gap between India and Pakistan is much larger and becoming bigger. The size of population difference is 1:6. So maybe Pakistanis can breed faster, and they are breeding faster, has a higher population growth rate, which has its own downsides as well. But what can it be? It can become 1:5. Supposing India's population declines a little, Pakistan's rises faster, it'll become 1:5. It'll still be a 1:5 ratio. The economy size, however, is 1:10, and India's growth rate is higher at the moment, and that could end up becoming a much bigger gap. Since the economy is critical for the size of the military you can maintain, therefore, that will become a factor as well. And so it is less sustainable in our case. And so I cite a totally unusual comparison. And I say, let's try and visualize Belgium in 1830, a new country, primarily the Spanish Netherlands, Catholic, predominantly Catholic, but declares independence, becomes independent. What if Belgium had thought like Pakistan, that we will create unity between the Flemish and Walloon population of Belgium by projecting France or Germany or somebody else or the Netherlands as the eternal enemy? Now, Netherlands would have been slightly more manageable, perhaps, as an eternal enemy, but France and Germany, Belgium would have had to make a whole lot more chocolate than it does to be able to compete with France in everything. And they didn't do that. They went for a totally different vision. Belgium ended up becoming the center of a more unified Europe, taking advantage of the conflict between, say, for example, Germany and France. Why couldn't Pakistan do that? China and India are the main adversaries in Asia. Pakistan could be the one that could actually be the one that straddles the two in terms of taking economic advantage. Roads and oil pipelines running from north to south and east to west, and Pakistan could be the economic beneficiary. So that's the kind of vision I lay out. And I know that it'll be, the purpose is, of course, to generate debate, and not just between you and me, but between a lot of people.
In the book, you discuss the Belgian analogy.
I discuss the Belgian analogy, I discuss the Yugoslavia analogy, I discuss what you talk about, sustaining nationalism through a common adversary, and the success stories and potential failures as well. And then in case of Yugoslavia, I actually cite literature that shows that the Yugoslavs thought that they were strategically located. And they were strategically located. And then when they stopped being a Soviet ally, they became like a bridge country. But then the Soviet Union collapsed. So you can't build the future. So 210 million people, Pakistanis, our future should not depend on how America views the world or how China views the world, because they can change their worldview. And does that mean our entire life changes because of that? And that's exactly what happened. We thought we were at the center of the universe during the Cold War. And then the Cold War ended. And then, we've become important again because of terrorism, but in a very negative way. So is it more important to be important to others, whether in a negative way or a positive way, or whether by becoming allies and getting into trouble because of that, or thinking about your own people and investing in them?
This Belgian analogy is very creative. This is the first time I've heard you say it. This is very interesting, worth thinking about further. Thank you. Thank you.
It's been 15 years of sort of reflecting on it and thinking of every possible analogy.
Right. Okay, let's open up for Q&A. Yes.
I have a question. So I guess in light of the analogies that you've provided of other nations, and sort of given that you've mentioned the space for Twitter and other sort of technological social media spaces, how do you think that technology might emerge as a disruptor, either positive or negative, in Pakistan's pursuit of its reimagination?
So the problem with technology is that technology always ends up being managed by somebody or the other. I mean, I know young people want to think of a new universe in which just because they're tweeting and they're, but very frankly, you are being totally swamped with stuff that is being generated by troll farms in St. Petersburg. And in case of the Pakistan-India Twitter space or Facebook space, there are troll farms in India and there are troll farms in Pakistan, being managed by various intelligence services and various actors, et cetera. So since it's open to abuse, the technology's potential for positive impact gets reduced. And if some solution can be found to that, I mean, for example, one of the things is if there was a way that people could access their Twitter accounts and their Facebook accounts only by their fingerprint, thereby every individual having one account, then those technologies will be a positive thing. Then they will have a more democratic impact, perhaps. But right now, they are open to manipulation. And they are open to manipulation, and they are open to making you and me actually enter echo chambers, which is what is happening. So in case of Pakistan, first of all, the state manages the social media. So I don't know if you know, Pakistan is one of those countries where Google has agreed as part of the terms of entering the market to sort of excluding certain sites from its aggregations. Facebook has agreed to censorship of sorts. I mean, they don't use the word censorship. They all use the words, cultural and religious sensitivities. But that's what it is. I mean, China has that, and then and Twitter also allows a lot of restrictions on certain accounts. So therefore, the debate gets skewed.
The New York Times story on troll farms was very scary. This is about last week, 7 days ago or so. It's a lead story in New York Times.
So to give you a first-person account, I mean, I read the New York Times story also, and I've read a little more on this subject because there was a time when I was getting a lot of threats on Twitter. We'll kill you, we'll do this to you, we'll do that to you, etc. So I ended up submitting some of them to the FBI. And I found out that 700 threats came from 17 accounts, essentially. I mean, 17, ISPs. So 17 computers were generating the accounts that were amounting to 1,700 threatening accounts. So so that's what it. So that's what the reality of that world is. The person you've been arguing with vehemently on Twitter for the last 5 days may actually just be a bot who's automatically set to reply to you based on the words you use. And that is not going to change any minds. What we are talking about is changing of minds and outlooks. And that's not going to change if people with resources and countries with resources and governments with resources are going to manipulate that process.
Yeah.
Your talk was very interesting. Thank you for that. I wanted to touch on two things that you discussed. One was the Islamization of Pakistan and the pro-military sentiment in Pakistani population as well. And both of these things are just not only in this state, but also very much present in the public opinion, which, and that's why, like, if you criticize one of these things, one of the two things, both of them, you can be on the hit list of most people especially in Punjab. So how do you...
I am, so, yeah. So I know, yeah.
So how do you navigate such a line between talking about these things but also reimagining Pakistan?
Well, the reason why I'm able to or I can afford to reimagine Pakistan is because I'm not physically there right now, and I think that's a good thing to do. I mean, sometimes being in exile is a good idea. What I'm hoping for is that there will be enough people in Pakistan who will read the book, which will be in Urdu as well, and there will be some debate. There's small space for discussion and debate in Pakistan, but there is. And every few weeks, on average, something happens that makes people say, maybe, yeah, we need to check this. Like, for example, some young man gets, what's the word for it, he is beaten to death at a university campus, and people say, God, what's happened to our society? And then you have a situation where the terrorists come and attack a school and kill school children, and then people. So hopefully, the worsening of the Islamization problem, the fact that 3,000 people held Islamabad hostage recently, and the government, and especially the military, just buckled under, will generate enough of a reaction. After all, Iran and Saudi Arabia, where there's been a similar process of top-down Islamization, etc., has also generated reaction, because after all, human beings do have an innate desire to not be forced into believing certain things, and especially when beliefs conflict, and Pakistan is unique in this sense that just look at the leadership that created Pakistan. Mr. Jinnah was a Shia. Saraga Khan was, of course, head of the Ismaili community who supported. Liaqat Ali Khan was a Sunni of Deobandi orientation. There were others. Sir Zafrullah Khan, who became Pakistan's foreign minister, was an Ahmadi. So there were all these sects of Islam that were represented in the elite at that time. Now, if you're going to say that only one of those interpretations is the true Islam, then obviously that will also generate conflict. So it's interesting that Ahmadi Muslims, who are actually conservative Muslims in their religious orientation, they have now become one of the strongest advocates of secularism, because the Islamization has ended up marginalizing them. Similarly, Shias are strong advocates of secularism because they see that this process of going after a limited interpretation, because that's what happens with religious interpretation. It starts off as all Christians against everybody, but then it turns out, and by the way, now that we've taken care of those heathens, by the way, you're not Christian enough. And that's what's happening in Pakistan. It started out with all Muslims saying we can't live with Hindus, then everybody getting together and saying can't live with the Ahmadis. Now some people trying and saying, oh, by the way, the Sunnis can't live with the Shias, and then among the Sunnis there's the Barelwis and the Deobandis, and then among the Barelwis there's also those who are more Sufi oriented and those more Sharia oriented, etc., etc. I personally think, and now I know that it's sounds like not very hopeful when you say that your hope is that the worsening situation will be the source of the hope. But that's my hope, that the awareness in the younger generation of Pakistanis that this is a recipe for constant trouble and is going to hold us back is going to be where the change will come from.
When the low-level equilibrium, to use social science languages, and when the low-level equilibrium
Equilibrium,
cannot go any lower.
absolutely, absolutely.
Cannot go any lower.
I personally feel it's almost there. It's almost there because the number of conflicts within Pakistan are just enormous.
Yes, ma'am, your hand was up. Yours, yeah.
Well, I mean, I found this fascinating, and I really know very little about this part of the world. Last year in this room, I saw a documentary on India, just on one night in Delhi, every night in Delhi, 6 million people looking for a place to sleep. It would seem to me that all this reimagining has to take into consideration this unbelievable poverty and lack of facilities and lack of housing. And I mean, I don't know where where the population has to somehow, or the government has to somehow solve immeasurable problems here before they can, like imagining a dinner or food on the table. It seems to me that it's all theoretical and.
I would argue that
Can I
actually.
reformulate this? Yeah, can it be said that an attack on poverty and deprivation, a very clearly identifiable attack on poverty and deprivation, would be a necessary condition for the act of reimagination? Or you think that's not the way it should be
I
posed?
think the reimagination is going to be the attack on poverty and deprivation because look at it another way. So, what is the cause of the poverty? I mean, it's not like the land is producing less, it is obviously producing more. It's not like the industrial output has fallen, it's actually risen. What has changed? So two things have happened. One is, of course, the inequality in terms of income distribution, but also the disproportionate allocation of resources for the military, the disproportionate allocation of resources for ideological agendas. So you build a fancier mosque, whereas a perfectly functional mosque already exists, but you want to do it as a political symbol. And so therefore you invest lots of money into it. And therefore you don't have the money to allocate to the poorest of the poor. And so the reimagining has to be done primarily, and it may involve the elites more than it may involve the general masses, that you know what, we cannot live in these islands of prosperity for ourselves amid this sea of deprivation, while we maintain ourselves by keeping alive these ideological precepts which have no economic or poverty alleviation result or consequence whatsoever. I mean, there's no way Pakistan will be able to give jobs to. Now, Pakistan's median age is 23. So 210 million people, 105 million people are below the age of 23. It's a very young population. So a young population basically means that you have to think about their jobs, their lives moving forward. And if essentially you are only breeding, religious extremist sentiment, those people are not employable on the one hand. On the other hand, the military cannot employ everybody. So you basically have to have an economic orientation, and you'll get an economic orientation only if you reimagine yourself as a nation of people rather than a nation of cheerleaders for a huge military and an ideology that is abstract.
So in this argument, then, attack on poverty is an integral part of the reimagination, not a prior condition for reimagination.
It's neither a prior condition.
No,
it's interrelated.
Yeah. So I'll go here first. Hasan, yeah.
So you seem to lament the fact that a lot of people in Pakistan regard you as some kind of traitor or some kind of bogeyman in the United States. So do you think that's the result of your ideas more, or the result of some of the actions that you might have taken in the past?
Like what actions? I mean, it's mainly the ideas. Basically, not everybody is thinking about me. I'm not vain enough to think that everybody knows me or everybody thinks about me. It's what the military says, what the propaganda on Pakistan's military-controlled media goes. I mean, Pakistan doesn't have a free media. I hope you know that. And so it's a portrayal. As far as actions are concerned, when I was ambassador until towards the very end, and that was after the Osama bin Laden raid, nobody seemed to have a problem with me. So obviously it's not about actions, it is about ideas.
Rahul?
The actions are, the so-called actions are an excuse to be able to attack the ideas. The ideas have existed for a much longer time.
Rahul?
I want to recap like what the book is doing and then ask some questions about how to get where you propose. So what I understand is the book is on the one hand an argument about why Pakistan's messed up. There's this gulf between its perception of itself compared with the perception others have of it. So there's this kind of the title of your book, Magical Delusions.
Magnificent
So
Delusions.
there's this ongoing magnificent delusion. Then the book is also a political agent because you want to propose what to reimagine. So what I observed when you list off, when you kind of recant who's doing the reimagining, all the titles that you list, which are very relevant, it's all elites. So it's all the occupations you've held. So it's journalists, scholars, and diplomats. And that's all factually true. I'm curious whether we can expect there to be a radical reimagining if it's once again elites at the table. What process or procedures could there be where there is both the contributions like your book, but kind of coming from the top, among those who are resourced and articulate and so on, with the groups on the bottom? Like what kinds of roundtables or debates or consultations need to occur so we can get to, for example, a Pakistan where there's constitutional recognition of minorities like the Ahmadis. There's proportional representation in the military, so like Punjabis are not overrepresented. Kind of what are the messy, tedious, boring steps to get to that newly imagined Pakistan?
So let me reformulate this also using another idea, which is that you can conceptualize a nation's politics as consisting of two layers, elite politics and mass politics, right? And that's a reasonably defensible proposition in many countries. And so Rahul is asking, it seems to me, how do we turn your arguments, which would be debated in elite politics, into matters in mass politics and shaping of the opinion down on at the street level?
I think
is that important at all?
It is important, but it will take a much longer discussion, totally devoted to that. But let me begin by saying that Pakistan itself was it was the consequence or result of elite politics. I mean, if we realize that in 1945-46, only 15% of British India's population was allowed to vote in the election in which the Muslim League won, and the Muslim League got just a little over half of the overall Muslim vote, because the votes were by communities. So in fact, that was one of the reasons why it became such a problem. Right? Like if it had been a genuine mass movement, then there wouldn't be the need to sustain an ideology at the top to keep it. The ideology was the way to make sure that no new populist movement came about from below. That was, for example, the earliest ones to react to Pakistan's centralized decision making were the Bengalis, who said, okay, we've created this country in the name of religion, but that doesn't mean we have to accept the language that we don't speak as the sole national language. And because Urdu was declared Pakistan's national language, and so they reacted to that. So it was reactions like that that made the elite decide that, you know what, keep the religious sentiment as the main organizing principle. So basically the elite, I mean, obviously there are benefits of any such organizing principle to the elite. That's why they keep them. I'm hoping to actually take advantage of the divisions within the elite, because after all, the elite also thinks about, what does this mean for us down the road? If the mullahs are going to, because after all, Mr. Jinnah was not a mullah. The top Muslim League leaders were not mullahs. They were using religion as a political organizing tool. And then the mullahs became important, because once you say we are trying to create a homeland or a country for Islam, then somebody shows up and says, oh, okay, I know more about Islam than you, so I'm going to take over now. And so the non-Islamized elite is the one that I'm hoping will adopt the idea and thereby transfer it, because every elite group in Pakistan has some mass support as well. That's how they survive. And so they will then use it as a new basis for new politics.
Like critical allies.
Nonial?
You mentioned the international context earlier. And so, what are the dynamics internationally that you think would facilitate reimagining Pakistan? And do you think that these international dynamics are going in the right direction or not? For example, U.S.-Pakistani relationship, which is sort of...
Look, I mean, international dynamics don't always go in the same direction, so you can't say they're going in the right direction or wrong. Bottom line is, I think that Pakistan's dysfunction owes a lot to its alliance with the United States in a very unusual way. On the one hand, it helped Pakistan to compensate for its lack of economic resources, etc. in the beginning, the inability of Pakistan to, of India to be generous at the settlement of partition, to give Pakistan its share of the assets, etc. And America kind of moved in. But $43 billion in assistance and reimbursements later, the United States feels that Pakistan's national interest, as Pakistan defines it, is not congruent with America's national interest. So the reason why Pakistan has been able to sustain its militant approach has been because there has been an economic cushion. The reason that Pakistan was able to wage war in 1965 was because it thought it had better quality. There was a 1:3 military balance at that time. And they thought that, quality-wise, we have better equipment, because they had the Patton tanks, which were American, and they had better planes. And the Pakistani Air Force did perform quite well in 1965. But in military terms, sheer numbers do end up mattering. And so if Pakistan is not able to get American military equipment at low prices or subsidized prices as we've got so far, then the realization that this is a fool's errand, this competition, may be easier. Similarly, Middle Eastern countries, recognizing that, providing endless jobs for unskilled Pakistani labor that can send remittances, that is not, and many of them did have a policy of discriminating in favor of Pakistan that they've now changed. Now they've said, you know what, it's going to be merit-based, like whoever has the better organized group of laborers that will come and work. Plus, they don't have the kind of money they had before in relative terms. So that will have an effect. China is the only one. And China, in my opinion, sees Pakistan as a secondary deterrent. If Pakistan has 400,000 Indian troops engaged on its border, then China doesn't have to worry about that. I think China's little fantasy with Pakistan and Pakistan's fascination with China will also come to some kind of, there will be a shock moment there as well. Something will happen in Xinjiang, it will be traced down to, Pakistan, and then China will also. So eventually there will be a international kind of, the recognition is already happening in a very small way, but the international stars haven't aligned completely so far. For example, January 1, Pakistanis were shocked with what President Trump said. I wasn't. I was actually with my family on the beach. And when I started getting calls from the media, and I said, oh, what has he said that's so unusual? And it was just the words. They didn't expect a president of the United States to say that, because Presidents Bush and Presidents Obama, and I dealt with both of them, they delivered very tough messages, but they were delivered very privately. And this was the first time, boom, So it was a shock for. But more shocking is the new White House sort of stuck in the details of a White House press release the other day was that new rules of engagement have been given to American forces in Afghanistan. And they are that they will be free to go after terrorist safe havens in Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's very significant. Now, if something happens along those lines, then there will definitely be a waking up in Lahore, Islamabad, and Karachi. That hasn't happened before. But it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be quick. Pakistanis are a little smug, with due respect to my countrymen in the room, about how all's going to be okay. We are too important. It's like a bit of too big to fail kind of attitude. And so external factors will have to be sustained for a longer time to have the desired effect in making people think that maybe we need to change something at home.
Can I?
I mean, it's easy to burn American flags and say they don't understand and what are they doing, and they've done it before, and then to change internal policy on that basis.
The deepening of friendship with China is likely to spur national reimagination or constrain it?
So first of all, I don't buy that there is a deepening of relationship.
You
I think
don't?
Pakistan and China are as close as they ever have been.
I see.
It's just that China is putting a little more money and it's putting it in loans. And so Pakistan will be straddled with a huge debt problem down the road, just like Sri Lanka is. So I don't buy this, that it's a deepening. The relationship is already deep.
Okay.
And it is one of the factors that constrains reimagining. Because every time you have an external cushion, the tendency to think that your own policies are actually having a bad impact on your own, it's like, I mean, if you have a shot available for the consequences of your bad health, like all these pills for managing cholesterol, people don't exercise when they can pop a pill. And so China is the Lipitor for Pakistan's permanent cholesterol problem. They don't want to exercise because China is there to pick up the slack. Look, a very simple thing. When I was ambassador, I had a huge delegation of Pakistan's textile manufacturers in Washington, D.C. And they were asking us to lobby for and ask for a new US legislation that would give Pakistan certain specific concessions for Pakistani textile products. So that, so I had my staff do a research paper for me before I would meet this huge all Pakistan Textile Manufacturers Association delegation. And in the research, I realized something that I hadn't realized before. The range of products that Pakistan exports to the US has not changed. The year was 2010. So I had asked somebody to do a study from 1960 to 2010. Turned out that the range was the same. So Pakistan was exporting knitted underwear, and it was exporting knitted underwear now. We had no share of the boxer shorts market. So I call it the boxer shorts problem. So we had this meeting. So I asked these people, I said, you know what, somewhere along the road, Americans changed habits. They stopped wearing, at least men stopped wearing knitted underwear, and a lot of them started wearing boxer shorts. Why didn't you start manufacturing boxer shorts? They all looked at each other and said, none of us thought about it. We already had facilities to do it. And so we kept producing. I think that's an attitudinal problem rather than because they were doing well. And so what they wanted was that America should somehow give more concessions for Pakistan to sell more boxer shorts instead of identifying. And then that reminded me of a discussion I had with the late Dr. Mahbubul Haq, who was our planning minister, finance minister, and great economist, and developed the Human Development Index. And he used to say at that time, and I'm talking about 1990, 91, he used to say to me, look at the Indians are changing their profile of exports. So software is becoming a major export. Jewelry is becoming major. They're not a textile exporting nation anymore. And now, of course, India exports machinery. I mean, the second most selling tractor brand in India is an Indian, in America is an Indian tractor, Mahindra. You wouldn't think that. Pakistan is still stuck. So it's a kind of a mind thing that all you need to do is go to the government, and our government then will go to Uncle Sam, now to Auntie China, and then we'll be able to get things done. And that is an attitudinal problem that needs to be changed in a bigger way.
Yes, sir.
First of all, both shukriya for your speech. I really enjoyed it. As you talk about how when you reimagine Pakistan, that it should move away from kind of an Islamic form of government or Islamic form of government towards secular, how do you imagine Pakistan's role in like the Muslim world, the OIC, and what role should it play? Should it change necessarily?
Well, first of all, OIC is, just the OIC.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. It has no teeth. It has no substantive sort of thing. It's just a grouping. There are many such groupings of nations, and OIC is one of them. It has never really had any effective character except maybe certain UN voting trends in which, for example, we blocked UN adoption of sort of a universal condemnation of blasphemy laws, or et cetera, et cetera. On those things we get together. Other than that, the OIC is toothless. As far as Pakistan's role with the Muslim world is concerned, I mean, I think Pakistan, we overplay the Muslim card. Every Muslim country makes decisions in its own interest. None of them make them in the interest of some imaginary ummah. We cling to it because it makes us feel a little secure and gives us a little feeling of numbers. Otherwise, the reality of the matter is that, and it has happened time after time, Kashmir is one example. Pakistan claims that Kashmir is our core issue. Well, why have we never been able to get a resolution on Kashmir in the UN since 1957, which was the last time we got it? And that too when America helped us and supported us. Why won't the Muslim countries all get together and vote for us in the UN on Kashmir in a General Assembly resolution, or even try and get us a resolution in the Security Council, where I don't think India has a veto anymore, and I don't think Russia will veto on behalf of India. So why don't we do it? We don't do it because we don't have that support, but we don't want to acknowledge it to our own people because we've been brought up on this whole romance of the Muslim world as an entity.
Rehan?
I wanted to, on this point of reimagining Pakistan, you mentioned the role of democracy. And I was curious to hear your thoughts on the role of the Pakistan People's Party in reimagining Pakistan. At least to my mind, People's Party, since the rise of mass politics in Pakistan, is the first truly national party we've had in Pakistan. It's won elections from Punjab, from Balochistan, and produced two prime ministers, Sindhi prime ministers in Pakistan. It's also the party,
And a couple of Punjabi ones as well.
It's also the party ostensibly that has fought for women's rights and even for minority rights in Pakistan. Yet even the People's Party is the party, as you mentioned, it was under Zulfikar Bhutto that in our parliament, it's an embarrassment for all of us who care for minority rights that Ahmadis were declared non-Muslims. A leftist progressive party in Pakistan did that. That is one of the anomalies we have to deal with. The People's Party took a thrashing in the previous election, as you know, and so it's also associated with malgovernance and corruption. But if there is this hope for reimagining of Pakistan, I'm wondering if you can sort of detach yourself from your own association from it. What role can the party play right now in
Well,
that?
it's not just the People's Party. I would hope that in the reimagination, the ANP would have a role, the Baluch parties would have a role, possibly even the MQM might have a role, and Sindhi nationalist parties might have a role. The PPP, I mean, it's a complicated history. The party's history is complicated. If you see my writings, I have not always been completely charitable to the party because I think that I am all for compromise. All of us Our lives are made up of compromises. But they always have to sometimes kind of take a stand. And I think that the ground that has been ceded has been far greater than the party has actually stood its ground. So, in fact, one of the reasons why it has ended up getting the political or electoral thrashing is partly because of malgovernance and partly because what does it stand for? Right now, I don't see it trying to reimagine anything. Right now, all I see is another series of compromises trying to get some lost ground back, possibly with an understanding with the establishment in some parts, an understanding with the religious groups in another, etc., etc. When a transition in leadership takes place, which eventually it will, then we will see if the new leadership of the party, the next generation, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, or anybody else from that generation, is able to effectively say, you know what, we do need to be part of the process of reimagination. One word about the whole ZAB saga of 1974. In Pakistan, between mosque and military, I've written about it, not in as much detail as my wife Faranaz Isfahani has written in Purifying the Land of the Pure. Ironically, she found it in her research. I had overlooked it when I was writing Pakistan between mosque and military, that Mr. Bhutto and Maulana Maududi both saw the 1974 decision on Ahmadis as quote-unquote the solution of a problem. Bhutto saw it as a solution in terms that, okay, I've done a constitutional amendment, I've declared them, but there will be no actual consequences. And Maulana Maududi saw it as a solution that, okay, now you've solved it, you've determined, you've given the answer to the question, now we'll go forward with the action. And both statements ran in dawn on the same day. Both had the same headline, old problem solved, you know, and it was just ironic of how political leaders can sometimes make a compromise without realizing what others who are part of that compromise may want out of that compromise.
So
and as you know, after he lost power and General Ziaul Haq came, the real teeth came when the Ordinance 20 and Ordinance 21 came about, which actually put restrictions on Ahmadis and made it virtually impossible for them to follow their religion, because Ahmadis consider themselves Muslims, so their own religion tells them that you have to consider yourself Muslim. But the law of the land says if you do anything that is like a Muslim, like say Assalamu alaikum in a public place, or if you say, refer to whoever you consider to be a prophet and his family members with certain titles, then you can go to prison. And that was something Bhutto had not envisaged. But he made a compromise without looking at the compromise. And someday I will write a book on the PPP as well. And my view is that the PPP has done a lot of that throughout. And one of those things on which they compromised without thinking about longer-term compromises was when I was asked to resign. Because even that had implications that, the military can actually decide whose actions are patriotic or not without any transparency. A guy says this happened, the intelligence chief says, yeah, his version seems reasonable, and that's the end of the matter, and you get the judges and everybody to say, without a proper process of a open trial and a proper examination of witnesses, etc. And they compromised. And right now also they are compromising on a number of things. So I think the PPP's role will change only with change of leaders.
So Husain,
Don't make that into a headline though.
The point then is that Bhutto didn't take the constitutional amendment seriously. He just thought it was a formal move. It would have no teeth.
Yeah, he thought that it was a formal move because it would have no legislation and no legal consequences behind it.
And clearly
And so
Maulana Maududi
and the first legal consequence that was forced was, okay, passports, especially for Hajj, etc., people now have to sign a form that they are not Ahmadis to be able to get a passport that will say that your religion is Islam to be able to go for Hajj. And so that was the first consequence that happened right under him. But after him, the consequences multiplied, because Ziaul Haq then made all these ordinances and laws. So constitutions have to be, which is why I always say that one of the big problems in Pakistan is that their constitutional amendments come too quickly. I mean, Pakistan's constitution has a much smaller life than the American constitution and has had more amendments. Why amend the constitution? The constitution should be an overarching document, because after all, it's the laws that make all the difference, and therefore giving into the constitutional amendment was the mistake. Because if only a law had been made, we could have overturned the law with a simple majority later. But the constitution requires a 2/3, and 2/3 is now virtually impossible in two houses because of the way politics is fragmented and the various provinces have different political parties. And so the Senate will forever have a very strong tendency not to change it. So that'll
Now, the last question I'm going to ask, there's a few minutes left. This is an important one. I think some people want to ask that. And I don't mean this to be, Husain, a frivolous question. I want this to be a serious question. And I hope you'll see it in that spirit. What are the implications of the rise of Imran Khan and his party for Pakistan's politics in the coming years? Does it hurt the reimagining process? Does it aid it, or it's irrelevant to the possibility of reimagining?
It's not necessarily irrelevant, but what it does is it creates. So his slogan is change, whereas everything he stands for is not change. The only thing he promises to change is that he will be the leader, and therefore he's financially less corrupt. So I understand a large number of young people who don't like corruption sort of saying, okay, the People's Party is corrupt, the Muslim League is corrupt, enough of those, they have dynastic leadership, we don't like them, so this guy is it. But other than that, what does he stand for? He has consistently supported the Taliban at different times. He hobnobs consistently with the army. He totally disrespects other politicians, so he will be extremely authoritarian if he ever gets power. I'm still one of those who's thinking he won't. Knowing him personally as I do, all you have to do is try to find any coherence in his arguments at any stage. There isn't. And so what he has created is essentially a political party that on the one hand combines the hopes of those who want a non-corrupt government with a large segment of the pro-military establishment backing him. And therefore, he is unlikely to help the process of reimagination. If anything, he will end up being a semi-authoritarian figure who works very closely with the military and will probably have a very bad falling out with them, because the one great thing in Imran Khan is the belief in Imran Khan's greatness. And so that's such a, when you have this narcissistic personality disorder, leaders of that genre, we all know how they behave. And the impact they have on nations.
This prediction then is that he cannot remain a yes boy of the military. In the military,
no, I mean, at some point there will be something that will trip him. I mean, it's like, look, I mean, he has had positive judgments from judges, but when he didn't have one or two, he started criticizing them. Then he got the judges back on his side. Then he sort of waxes and wanes. And so my prediction is that if he were to come to power, he would start off as a protege of the military, but like all other past proteges of the military going back several decades, he'll end up turning on them. But more important than that, he has no experience of governance. He is only he's a product of this new celebrity leader culture that we are seeing across the world. Somebody who's well known and who's famous, and therefore people, I mean, he's been in politics since 1997. The first election he ran for in 1997, he put candidates in every seat for every seat of parliament, won none. And his party at that time raised more money than the two other political parties. got fewer votes than the two other political parties, spent more money than two other political parties. If you remember, the 1997 election was the first time political parties were allowed to advertise on television. And they bought, Imran Khan's party bought a whole bucket load of television advertising, all of it with Imran Khan, and, you know, new broom will sweep clean, etc., etc., new bat will sort of, you know, hit every ball for a six, etc., etc. Got no votes. And the first time he got elected with Musharraf's backing and Jamaat Islami's backing. And so, so I am not particularly, I mean, first of all, I have a personal aversion to this celebrity politician thing, you know, somebody who hasn't been, I think like all occupations, politics is an occupation, and people should spend time doing it the right way by working through the political process and working, getting elected to parliament, serving in it. Even in this parliament, in which he has been there for the last 4 or 5 years, he's hardly ever gone to parliament, which shows his disdain for the process. But all he does say is, I'll make a great prime minister, and those who support him believe that.
Well, 1 minute left, so your question will be 15 seconds.
Okay. So you mentioned briefly the recent protests in Islamabad, in which 3,000 mullahs basically shut down the entire city. So in your vision of reimagining Pakistan, how should the government deal with incidents like that?
But if they are peaceful and they come for a demonstration, they do a demonstration like anybody else and go home. If they try to do a sit-in, the military and the police remove them.
But then, after that took place, if they threaten to bring protesters into every city in the country, is it not better to negotiate with them and send them home?
So basically, you will allow a small number of people to who want to speak for God, to tell people how to interpret God's word all along, constantly. It has gone back all the way. 1953, similar, in fact, worse demonstrations were held, and the military, anti-Ahmadiyya riots, the military came out and said, no, you're not going to destroy property and you're not going to attack people, and that's the end of that. The government stood firm, the military stood firm. And you can do that. You should have done that a long time ago, but you can do it even now if you have the will. But if the military is going to actually use the mullahs for political effect, then you will continue to have these things. I mean, Maulana Maududi was at least a scholar who wrote a exegesis of the Quran. Then it was Maulana Mufti Mahmud, who was also quite a scholar. Move forward. Now we have Khadim Hussain Rizvi, who does nothing but use abusive language, which nobody should use from the pulpit. So the quality of religious leadership has declined, but their influence has increased. And that is not necessarily good for Pakistan. And I think it's time for the military and governments to stand up. And it's amazing how they don't compromise. So for example, if this was a PPP demonstration, would there be a compromise? If I could manage 3,000 supporters in Islamabad who said, set Husain Haqqani free from false allegations, etc., and make sure that he can come back to Pakistan safely, and we won't go home till, will they compromise with those 3,000 and say, okay, Mr. Haqqani, get on a plane, please come home? They won't. So why do they do it with them? Because their hearts are with one another.
Well, I hope you'll agree we've seen a remarkable display of public intellectualism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Join us outside for a reception, and we can keep the conversation going.